Good afternoon. You're listening to Gambling with an Edge. Now here are your hosts, Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today is Norman Zadeh, who's played bunches of different gambling games, also is investing in the market, and all around looking for edges. Norman Zadeh, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So why don't we start out by you giving a 5-minute or so summary of what you've done in gambling and investing, and then we'll take it from there.
All right, I guess the easiest way, if you don't mind, is for me to just kind of quickly detail some of the highs and lows of my life. I started playing poker when I was 9 with some neighborhood kids. And then when I was 13, I started playing for money. And they ran out of money fairly rapidly. And then I started accepting Playboy magazines and whatever, real assets they had.
Something of real value.
And one of the kids actually got even with me because he was giving me his father's Playboys, and he ended up stealing them back along with my coin collection and my doodle bugs. I think he actually was the winner on that one. But then
the coin collection or the Playboys, the bigger tragedy?
I think it was the coin collection, actually, because I got those coins. This is another good story. And by the way, this is all in my book, The Rise and Fall of Perfect 10, available on Amazon, which nobody buys, but it's a great book anyway. So I was actually in 5th grade, and we were playing hop, skip, and jump. And this kid was playing hop, skip, and jump with these coins. And I looked at them and realized these are old coins. So I bought like an 1857 quarter from him and a 1914 D Mercury at dime, which is very valuable. So he stole all of those coins. They were quite valuable. But in any event, so I made enough money from playing poker and doing odd jobs in the neighborhood to buy myself a Corvette when I was 16, which was viewed as kind of a status thing in those days. In any event, I dropped out of high school when I was 16 and went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and assuming that I would, of course, continue my successful poker playing career, but as is generally the case in pretty much all efforts, you might think you're good, within a certain group of people, but then when you graduate and you're competing against a larger group of people, you discover you're not quite as good as you thought you were. So there were actually a few kids at Berkeley that had my number, so to speak. I was doing well against some of the kids there, but there was a kid named Rick Fine who just always beat me in heads up. And it was so bad that at some point I said to my mother, Mom, here's my savings book. Don't let me take any money from it. I couldn't afford to lose any more money. So sure enough, as I was walking to class, I see Rick Fine. He says, "You want to play some poker?" I say, "Sure." I proceed to lose $171 to him. And I had no money, so I had to sell all my books to pay Rick Fine. So, but I did end up making money, overall at Berkeley as well. And so, I had more of a bankroll. And then backgammon became the rage. And that was also due to the fact that there was this mysterious fellow named Lucky who was heard to be like losing large amounts of money, playing backgammon, and everybody was just like, in ecstasy trying to find this guy. Who is the guy? This is a long story, so I'm gonna shorten it for you. It's in the book, but to make a long story short, I ended up playing backgammon with Lucky, who turned out to be a very secretive grass importer. Not very nice guy, very nice guy. And I ended up winning, I don't know the exact number. I was very nice to him compared to some of the other greedy people around there, but it was probably at least, several hundred thousand, if not $500,000. But in those days, that was quite a bit of money. So let's see. Let me continue the story. So I got into backgammon. So then I was still in academics at this point, and I got my PhD. And then because I didn't have any academic offers, I had the choice between working at IBM or Bell Labs. I didn't want to work at either place, but I accepted a job at IBM, but it was in the middle of nowhere. It was a corporation I wanted to teach. And so I said, what can I do to give myself an option so I wouldn't just have to work for IBM? So I had heard that this professor at MIT called Nesmith Ankeny had written this book on poker. I figured he was going to do a mathematical analysis of poker, like a game theory optimal GTO strategy. I said to myself, you know what, maybe I can write a book like this myself and get it accepted before his comes out. So I had 3 months until I had to go to IBM, and I said, you know what, let me try to do this. So I wrote something called Winning Poker Systems, where I analyzed I determined as best as I could the best opening, calling, and raising strategies for low ball and high poker for high, which were they're not played anymore, but they were in those days. So these 5-card draw games, bluffing strategy. I had a little high-low poker in there, whatever, and I and my agent were able to actually I would say con is the right word, a editor at Prentice Hall to accept the book without even reading it because it was very badly written. Okay. When the editor finally saw the book, he was trying to get out of it. He said, Norm, he says, this book's going to take a lot of work. You're going to have to take a three-month leave from IBM, And I said, okay. It's like, I went to my manager. I said, look, I can't tell you what I'm doing here, but I could do this on your dime, but I prefer to do it on my dime. So please give me a 3-month leave. So they gave me a 3-month leave. I finished the book, which ended up being on the Playboy Book Club. I mean, it did reasonably well, but not fantastically well. And then 3 months later, I quit because I couldn't stand IBM. I couldn't think, whatever. And I basically started gambling professionally, backgammon, at the Mayfair in New York. So even though I know a lot about poker, and even though I've won quite a bit of money playing poker, actually my best game is backgammon, and I've won substantially more money at backgammon than I have at poker.
Do you still play backgammon, or did you give it up at some point?
I am, like I said before, a locksmith. So I play backgammon with people I can beat. Now, my level of play is still quite high. I probably could. I've actually beaten. I think I beat the number 2 guy in the world at something. I mean, a friend of mine said, "Oh, this guy's coming in. It's some Israeli guy. I think he might have died actually, but he was very highly ranked." And he said, "I want you to play with this guy." I said, "Fine." So I ended up beating him. The guy thought I was cheating. He was banging. He was going nuts. And I have been known to roll very well. I don't know if that's some sort of I figured it out or something, and I actually, but I actually believe in something extrasensory going on when you're playing backgammon. I sometimes when I've been playing, I know I'm going to roll a bad number, and then I roll a bad number. I just can't explain it, but I think there's something. What?
This is bizarre coming from a mathematician.
Oh my God! I'm sorry to interrupt you. When I was sports betting, I was so superstitious. I used to walk around. I would have a procedure. I would walk around the table, walk through the bathroom once, wash my hands, walk around the table, and then listen to the scores. And this was going on like every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, I'd be walking around the table, walking around the bathtub, and then listen to the scores. Oh man, super superstitious. So,
that's just shocking to me.
Oh my God! Here's the story. Oh, you want to hear it? You want to hear a true shocker story?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not directly related to backgammon, but here's a story. It's not in my book, by the way, so you're getting it first. Your viewers and your listeners, whatever. So I like massages. I've always liked massages. So I was having a massage. This was when I lived in my big house in Beverly Park, and I get this weird, I'm kind of like half awake and I'm thinking and I'm dreaming that my father is below me massaging my ass. I'm sorry. But that's what was my dream. Now you got to understand something. I was never close to my father. I was very close to my mother, but I was super not close to my father. I mean, we rarely ever talked, okay? The idea of my father, who was a very conservative guy, massaging my butt, okay, is not what one would normally think of, okay, when one wakes up in the morning. Oh, my dad, so whatever. My mother calls me a half an hour later and says, Norman, your father had a heart attack. Now, I'm sorry, but you talk about science and odds and probabilities. The probability that was just a random event to me is pretty darn small. So I personally believe in some sort of communication. I just believe there's so much human beings don't know. 10,000 years from now, if we're lucky enough to live that long, they'll go, oh, yeah, that's obvious. It's this and that. I think my father was communicating to me.
Well, Carl Jung called that cosmic unconsciousness. He believed in that stuff too. So,
I mean, forgive me for delving off completely onto outer space as far as your program is concerned. But let's face it, human beings are incredible creatures, okay? How we actually got here, how we actually function, how the whole thing is actually put together and actually works most of the time is incredible. I don't believe in the theory of evolution, frankly. I also don't believe really that, there was an apple and there was an Adam and there was an Eve or any of the other religious, propositions. I don't believe any of it. I don't believe anyone has ever really given me a very good explanation. If we had more time, I would explain to you why the evolutionary theory probably is wrong, but we don't have time for that. Okay. So let me continue.
Yeah, we'll stick with gambling today.
Let's go 3,000 years. Okay. Okay. So let's see. So backgammon. Okay. So how did I get into sports betting? So because I was playing lucky, and every once in a while I was fortunate enough to get lucky over to my house. One time he was at my house, he was betting on basketball. And then later, when he got caught and it was in boron for 5 years, guess who Lucky asked to visit him in jail? Well, because I was teaching at Stanford at the time and I had vague credentials, Stanford professor, blah, 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 I was the guy who visited Lucky in jail. And because Lucky wanted to bet, I was his only out, so I would take his bets, lay it off with the bookmaker, and then he used to lose, so I would have to pay the bookmaker for him. And then, of course, I never got paid, but that's a separate story. But I decided, you know what, maybe if I could figure out the sports stuff, I could actually take the bets myself, and so I wouldn't lose to the bookmaker. So that's when I started studying of sports betting. And I actually was pretty good at betting on football when I wasn't analyzing it mathematically. When I was just watching the games at a store in Palo Alto, because I didn't have a television in my apartment at Stanford, I actually had enough of an insight. And I'll tell you a funny handicapping story now. So I was watching the Houston Oilers with Earl Campbell, and their quarterback was Dan Pastorini. And there was a question about whether or not Dan Pastorini was going to play because of his eye. So I figured out where they were staying. I called the hotel, and I said, can I speak to Dan Pastorini, please? They put me through. Dan Pastorini enters the phone. I say, Dan, how are you doing? It's blah, blah, blah. How's your eye? He says, it's great. I'm playing. I bet $1,000 on the game and won easily. So that's one of my handicapping stories. There are others similar to that. But when I started analyzing football mathematically, then I couldn't win. Okay. So then I was basically a loser, but I was a winner in pro basketball. I was a 3-time handicapping champion in a contest. They call it the American Associated Documented Sports Services. Something I don't even know it exists anymore, but I was 3 years in a row. And then I also was very good at pro baseball.
Now, for beating those, were you building a model or mining data, or was that also this kind of gut feeling, watching the game kind of thing?
Okay, so with baseball, there was a mathematical model. First of all, you have to start out by normalizing the stadium coefficient. So you have to get a run. Certain stadiums are more susceptible to runs being scored. So whether it's Atlanta Stadium or Chicago Cubs, whatever, you can get many more home runs and runs than others. So you have to figure out, you have to normalize the stadium. So you have to divide each stadium by its normal run output. So you normalize things. And then there are things in baseball, like one thing is you have to estimate the pitcher's next performance. So you have a record of how they did in the past. And so the question is, what are they going to do in their next game? And so just as an example of a problem that would come up, suppose a pitcher is new to the league, has pitched a 0.0 ERA for his first 7 games. What's the distribution of his ERA in the next game? Okay. Well, you do some statistical mining and you discover that, in fact, his estimated ERA is very close to the league average. There's a very substantial regression to the mean in baseball. So people who are expecting great pitchers to keep being great generally will be somewhat disappointed. They will tend to revert. Now, however, if you were an expert in baseball and you can see that this pitcher is truly great, they weren't great because they got lucky and just pitched well the first 7 games. They're great because they really, truly are great. That's a different story. So there's a certain advantage to actually understanding the game, which I did not have that advantage, but I still was able. Generally, we made money. And when I say we, there's a guy named Joe Russell, who you may have heard of, that was betting at the same time with me, and we used to exchange
Backgammon
it.
player?
Yeah, Joe Russell. I think he was
Yeah,
a backgammon.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still
He only won the
a
world
top
championship
backgammon.
once.
Yeah, still a
Joe-
top backgammon player.
Yeah, he's a super smart guy. I mean, he and I were comparing notes back in those days, and we were both betting baseball. We had both come up with roughly the same kind of model, you know. And at that time, we both felt that one of the ways to make money was to take a really strong pitcher with a really good hitting team against a weak team with a weak pitcher, because generally the odds were not high enough. In other words, the odds might be 2-1, but they should have been 3-1, something like that. He kept doing it. I stopped, and went on to other things. But that was the basic idea in baseball. With basketball, I did a lot of stuff that was somewhat sneaky. Like I would actually track the referees, because there were certain referees like Earl Strom and Jake O'Donnell, but particularly Strom, who always favored the visitor. I don't know if he just enjoyed making the home crowd angry, or he was actually doing his job. But he was worth at least 4 points for the visitor pretty much most of the time. That's a lot in pro basketball. There were other things like taking a rested home team against the tired visitor who won the night before. The lines were not there; they weren't really that accurate there. But I have a funny story about that also, if you want to hear it. I will tell you the story. So I had a friend named, they called him the Shah. He's a Persian guy, and really nice guy, big bettor. And he and one of his friends had developed a system for beating pro football. And the Shah was also quite good at pro basketball, to the point where a lot of the guys that I knew from the Mayfair in New York and other big gamblers would follow the Shah. In other words, the Shah would come up, make his basketball bets in the morning. Okay. And I actually started moving some money from him at one time. And then people, some of the other guys would follow him. So what he was playing on moved the lines. Okay. He didn't really completely understand that if you have a rested home team against a tired visitor who won the night before, it's worth about 3 points for the home team. So after a while, I don't know what, I was just, good guys finish last, no good deed goes unpunished, whatever one of those things, came into play. I told him he was off by about 3 points on the home team. He was betting the visitor, when he should have been, All of a sudden, when he stopped doing that, all the big money stopped flying. So that edge left me. And then he also had a problem with the totals. He didn't have the totals right. Okay. So the basic methodology for totals is, let's say the average score in a basketball game is 200 points. Okay. Actually it should, so it's 102 to 98. The home court's worth about 4 points. So let's say that's the average score in the league. It may not be, but let's assume it is. So suppose you have an average team that scores 200 against an average team that scores 200, okay? I'm just going to tell you what the answer is. The expected total is 200. You got an average team scoring 200 versus an average team scoring 200. The average is 200, okay? Now let's say you have a team scoring 210 versus a team scoring 210. What's the estimated total? The answer is 220, because the 210 team against an average team scoring 200 would score 210. But since it's against a team scoring 210, they're going to score 220. The Shah did not realize that. He thought the average was 210. And so the total lines were off across the country. So when I told the Shah about that, again, no good deed goes unpunished. totals came down. That also killed a lot of my edge, which is maybe why I stopped betting on basketball. So I think that pretty much summarizes I stopped betting in around 87 because I started getting very seriously into the market. The market is a much bigger game. It is gambling. A lot of people are losing their asses in futures and options. Wall Street doesn't want you to know that, but it's true. Don't trade long options and futures if you like your money. Burning it would be more fun. Okay. But there are people who make a lot of money in the market. Some of them are serious applied mathematicians, like a James Simons, for example. I ended up making in the money because I started an investing competition in '83. And I learned from some of my top traders around 1990 how to make money switching mutual funds. So I made a significant amount of money between, say, 92 and 2000 switching mutual funds and managing other people's money. I have since lost most of that money on my magazine Perfect 10 and doing other stupid things. If you want to send me, I'm going to do a GoFundMe after we finish this program. That's why I asked you guys to help me. Anyway, so no, I still have some cash left, a little bit. But so where am I? So go ahead.
Couldn't you always go back to, I mean, math is where the money is. It seems like you should be able to go back to some form of gambling, whether it's in the market or some other form of gambling, and always be able to make money, I would think.
Well, I can make money two ways right now. I can make money playing poker because I am able to beat the casino games at the relatively medium stakes. In other words, I understand my limitations. Okay. I know a lot about poker, but I also know that I don't play enough to compete against the really great players who are sitting there in Vegas, and playing like 8 hours a day. It's like an MMA contest. You can't go into the ring unless you're training every day. So because I don't play poker that often, I don't expect to beat the really great guys. I can see when they make mistakes. I can admire their great plays. Okay. I am good enough to beat, like I can go down and steadily win at, say, Hollywood Park here in Southern California in the 3-5 game and average like maybe $350 per, say, 8-hour session. And that includes the rake and whatever, which is not bad. But, I get tired of doing that. We have COVID, so I haven't really been playing poker very much, but I could win if I had to. And what would probably happen, by the way, since I haven't completely lost my mind, is I would actually probably get quite good. So if I were to be playing, like 8 hours a day in the casinos, I probably could actually go up and hold my own against some of the really great players. But they still have an advantage over me because they're better at reading players at the table. I probably will I'm a nervous guy, so I can't bluff as smoothly and effortlessly as some of these characters. So I still think in the end, they would be taking my money. I wouldn't be taking their money. So thank you very much, guys. I'm not going to play with you. Okay. You're better than I, whatever. But I do understand the game very well. And anyway, that's poker. I don't know if I answered your question. I can win at backgammon. Also, I just have to selectively play people that I can beat, which is most everybody, by the way.
Well, but those are both pretty small markets, right? And you have, first of all, I mean, you made tens of millions of dollars in the markets, right?
Correct.
And so I would think between whatever skills you had there or sports betting also should be more lucrative than backgammon or poker. And with your math background, I would think, you would be able to go out and find ways to get an edge at various sports betting
Well,
types.
believe it or not, I am now using my math background to write songs. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that has always been the number one love of my life. I always wanted to do that, even when I was like 19, 20. And what happened was I met this girl who was writing songs, and I was watching her. She had a song, on YouTube and whatever. And so I said, you know what, let me write a song. So I sung it to her and she said, I love that. That was a big mistake because once she said, I love that song, then I went crazy and I've been writing since roughly March. you know, and I have maybe like 10 or 11 songs done. I have a manager, I have a sound engineer. We're now looking for a singer. I actually talked to I'll call him my friend. I hope he doesn't sue me for defamation for saying that. But I'd like to say that I'm friendly with Little Anthony of Little Anthony and the Imperials. How am I friendly with Little Anthony, who, by the way, is one of the greatest singers of all time, and he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Hurt So Bad, Tears on My Pillow. You know, he's a super nice guy. I actually talked to his son. I didn't talk to him yet, but so they're trying to help me find a good singer. But I know Little Anthony because when I did Perfect 10 magazine, I always wanted to interview my favorite singers. So I searched out people like Little Anthony, who was one of my favorite singers, Blue Magic, the Stylistics, you know, Larry Chance and the Earls, I believe, you know, fantastic singers, Dion DiMucci, Dion and the Belmonts. Anyway, so I'm getting long-winded here. Put me back on course, please.
Well, go ahead, Bob.
On backgammon, when you first played backgammon back in the 70s or whenever it was, McGreal's book might have been out, but the literature was not that extensive of quality information. Today, XG is a software product, very inexpensive. You can put on your phone or your laptop, and you can get good, much better in 2 or 3 months of solid study than those of us who played in the 70s got in 5 or 10 years. So
True.
How does your game hold up against the new generation who are computer based?
Well, first of all, I'm at about a 4 forward XG. So, you know, I mean, obviously that's not great, but it's still in the world class range. So, you know, and I don't
Yes,
play
it
it very
is.
often. So, what?
Yes, it is.
So I play. Yes, it is, or I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
he
know,
said yes, it is.
yes, it is
Yeah,
really
but I
great.
don't know what yes it is mean. Is it yes is it's good or yes it is? I don't know. I think the world guy is 3.2 or something. I don't know. The thing is that you can't just because no, absolutely you're right about the question is a great question. Okay, so you're right. I'll tell you. For example, when I started, I was at the very beginning of all this. I used to roll out games to try to figure out. And I had a dice sheet. I had a dice sheet, so I had the different rolls, so I could make sure I was randomizing it. I was one of the first guys, forgive me for bragging, who realized that when there were holes in the dice, it affected the distribution of the dice. So the 6 was more likely to come up because it was lighter, and the 1 was the heaviest when there were holes in the dice. So that's why you had to use dices without holes. So you could actually win money with propositions that, you know, that the 6s would come up more if a guy didn't realize that the dices with holes in it were not really pure, you know, didn't broke properly. In any event. So, but like I would analyze bar point versus bar point, you know, and I mean, I would roll through like when's the right doubling position. So I would actually take a position like 1 man back versus 3 man back. Okay. And let's say you've got the 5 point and he doesn't, right? And actually roll it out 20 times and try to figure out what's the best way to play it, you know, and how often do you win and how often do you get gammon. So I would try to do effectively a brute force XG. Now, the people who wrote XG have my complete admiration, okay? I mean, I've seen other programs written that I don't think were that good for poker, for example. But the guys who wrote XG are super smart guys, okay? I mean, that is an absolutely sensational, phenomenal program, okay? And so getting back to your question, yes, you can learn a lot from XG, but trust me when even though you may think you know a lot, it's really hard during the actual game to remember all this stuff because you can't remember what XG would do unless you've got some idea of what the idea is behind XG. So for example, in backgammon, right, when you're ahead, the basic obvious idea is you would prefer to not have a lot of contact with the other side, right? You stop hitting, you stop exposing blots, right? When you're ahead, usually, okay? Depending on, of course, on your position. When you're behind, you might possibly want more contact. But there's still, I am still, going to beat I don't care who the guy is. Yeah, XG, if you use XG a lot, you might get into the 7 to 6 range you're still not going to do well against a guy who has put in, say, 10 years solid at the backgammon like I have. I mean, I haven't played a lot at all recently, but there was a time when I played a lot, and I still remember a lot of that stuff.
Well, also backgammon, like pool or golf or something like that, it's about how you match up. And it sounds like you called yourself a locksmith. It sounds like you were good at knowing where to find what we used to call fish. I mean, guys that you knew you had a sizable edge. So, there was another very famous backgammon player in the 70s, very successful, named Tim Holland. And he was not a good player at all, but he was moved in wealthy circles, and he was great at matching up with people who couldn't play at all. And back then, he made more money than almost anybody playing backgammon, and he was not a good player.
Can I tell you Tim Holland? Well, you know that Tim Holland was married to Joanna Carson, right? Who's the wife of Johnny Carson. So I don't actually have a Tim Holland story. I've met him a couple of times, but he was around when I was around. I played Prince Alexis Obolensky in the finals of the Pebble Beach tournament back in like 72 or something. But anyway, Johnny Crawford got pissed off when I beat him in 73 near the finals in Vegas. But I'm sorry. There's a great story I've lost it. I'm sorry. What did you say? Oh, you don't have to be that great. Yeah, exactly. Here's a great story for you. So there was a guy named Kyle Larsen who I think made it into the Bridge Hall of Fame.
Yep.
So Kyle, this was back when I was at Berkeley, and Kyle was this legendary bridge player, backgammon player, poker player, right? I heard there was a poker game that had been going on for 5 days. I had just started playing backgammon. I waited until the poker game was finished. Okay. Shows you what a nice guy I am. Okay. Waited until the poker game was finished. Kyle comes out, stumbling out. And I say, Kyle, you want to play some backgammon? So he says, okay. So I made sure I brought him down to my place. I made sure to shine the light in his face and made sure there was no coffee or tea in the place. So I ended up meeting Kyle, who was quite a good player after he was comatose. He was laying there asleep, and I took the money out of his pocket and said, "You lost." But that's how I won. Okay, thank you.
Nice guy.
I beat McGrill regularly because McGrill was a steamer, and of course he never paid me. But that's another story. But
yeah, McGrill was a great player, but a terrible gambler.
Yeah. What else?
So you were investing for a long time. Investing and gambling have certain similarities. So have you done any thinking about that and drawn any conclusions?
All right. So I actually believe that sports betting is easier than investing in the money. And this is why. All you have to do to be a successful sports bettor, basically, is to have a better analysis of the team's strengths than other people. It's like a fight. If you can figure out, and you've been watching these two people, this guy is going to beat this guy in the fight, you bet on the guy who's going to win, okay? So the football game is determined, the outcome is determined like 3 hours later after the bets are in, right? And there are certain situations where one team is just a lot better than the other team, and they're just going to crush them. Now, one of the systems I had for pro basketball betting in the finals was the following. If you take a really good team, like at the beginning of I don't know how it is now, but at the beginning, normally the top seed plays the lowest seed, or something like that. Usually when you have a top team playing a lower ranked team, the top team is actually a lot better than the lower ranked team and will crush it. So they'll win by 14, 16, 18 because they've been jerking around during the regular season. A lot of these games, they don't really care. They're not playing that hard. But when at the end of the season, they're rested and they're ready to go and they're going to show. And when those Boston Celtics get out there against some, this is going back when they were a great team, against some relatively, enabled team, they'll beat them by a lot. That was a system that did quite well. Another thing that interestingly worked in pro basketball in the playoffs, although I don't know if it works anymore, but it was what I called the reversal theory. For some reason, when you had two teams that were relatively equal, and one team beat the other team, then for some reason, more often than not, the team that lost the time before would cover the next game. It might have only been worth 2 or 3 points, but whatever it was worth was enough to be successful. Now let's talk about the market, because that was the original question. The problem with the market is just determining that a company is a great company or that a company is a terrible company is probably a better example, is not necessarily enough. You have to determine how the public perception of that company is going to change. How is the world going to view that company in 6 months? Because if the world views the company that's not making any money as a great company in 6 months, you're going to lose a lot of money shorting that stock. And so there have been stocks like Amazon, for example, who historically, and I haven't been tracking it recently, but historically it had a super high price to earnings ratio. And so you would think, just using common, evaluation metrics, that Amazon was wildly overpriced. But the thing keeps going up and up and up. Okay. Now it turns out that the people who were long Amazon were right, as far as I can tell. It's a great company. Okay. But so just figuring out which company is stronger is not going to make you any money in the market. And the market actually, the best way to beat the market, in my opinion, and I tried to do this a couple of years ago and actually unfortunately lost some money, but I couldn't follow my own system, which was really embarrassing, but it happened. Is when everyone's selling, you got to be buying. When everyone's buying, you got to be selling. I know you've heard that over and over and over, but there's a lot of truth to it. So there's a lot of psychology involved here. Now, my current contest, which people can track, if you don't mind my throwing out a website address, it's financial-competitions.com. You can actually see how the people are doing in my current contest, which I still run. People are doing amazingly badly this year. I have like 291 entrants. There are only like maybe 30 people reporting profits out of 291. These are people that are supposed to be some of the top traders in the world, and like 85% of them are losing money. It's that hard to make money in the markets.
So I want to go back to how you decided to start, this, but first we need to take a commercial break.
Okay. The South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning at least 99%. This is more such games than anyone else has. Throughout July, there's a $650,000 Summer Money Madness promotion, which means there will be 2 simultaneous casino-wide progressives going that can be won at any machine with a player's card inserted that has played at least $1 through the machine in the past minute. The larger progressive starts at 10,000 and must hit by 25,000. All active players not actually hitting the progressive receive $25 in free play when it goes off. The smaller progressive ranges between 1,000 and 2,500. It is expected to go off about 3 times a day.
If you're serious about card counting, the Blackjack Apprenticeship membership is a great way to learn, train, network, and get the resources you need to succeed. We've had quite a few guests on Gambling with an Edge who exclusively trained and got their start through Blackjack Apprenticeship. You can check out their website at blackjackapprenticeship.com. They have member forums, training software, and guides to help you learn. That's blackjackapprenticeship.com, and you will find a link in the show notes.
Videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the Gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of the games. Game of the week is Good Times Pay. This is a 6 to 10 coins per line game, always triple play. Your choice as to how many coins. The random multipliers, but it's always a 100% bonus. So if the base game is 99.2, after the multipliers it's still 99.2. The strategy doesn't change. At South Point, the best game is quarter triple play NSU, 99.73 game, which is $7.50 per play. I sometimes play this game while I'm waiting for nearby machines to open up. All right. We're talking to Norman Zadeh. Earlier, you mentioned a book that you published that was really good, but it didn't sell well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that book's about?
I've actually published 4 books. Okay, the first book was Winning Poker Systems, which was published by Prentice Hall in '74. That sold reasonably well. It was in the Playboy Book Club. It was not my favorite poker book. I wrote a new book called Hold'em Poker Super Strategy. That came out, I think, in 2020. That is a really good book. It's such a good book that I actually am not really promoting it because I decided once it came out on Amazon, since it wasn't selling that well, I don't really want a lot of people, I mean, in other words, I either want to do really well or terribly, right? If I'm not doing well, then, forget it. I don't want people knowing about this book. It's a very good book. Okay. I figured out the right opening strategies, the right calling strategies. It's just, it's a top book. Okay.
This is for limit or no limit?
No limit, no limit. It's the best book in the market, in my opinion. Of course, I wrote it. Okay. But, thank you very much. Norm Zadeh, thank you for promoting your own book. Okay, the next book I wrote was called The Rise and Fall of Perfect 10. That is basically the story of my life and also has a fair amount about my father, whose name was Larsen Zadeh. He was a famous computer scientist who created fuzzy logic and whatever. But The Rise and Fall of Perfect 10, which is available on Amazon, goes through, my whole life, how I started playing poker, a lot of interesting poker stories, a lot of interesting backgammon stories, a lot of interesting academic stories, because I was a professor at Stanford and Columbia and UCLA and blah, blah, blah. Some sports betting stories. Then I had a adult magazine that was called Perfect 10, no implants. I went out with Joan Rivers, blah, blah, blah. Lucille Ball was in love with me. A lot of other stories like that. It's a pretty darn good book. Has sold miserably, but it's a darn good book. Okay. And my final book for all of you Trump supporters was Fox News, The Enemy Within. So it's actually not that pro-Trump, but what can I say? I wrote it. It sold 10 copies. It's like the worst book, the lowest selling book ever written. Okay. I am the person who wrote it. Okay. I win that title. So that's it.
So I wanted to go back to the investing contest, how you came up with that and how that works.
Okay. This is another very good story. I hope your listeners still have some eardrum capacity left. But so I was teaching at UCLA. This was 82, 83 to give you an idea how old I am. And I was just there for a year. The finance fag at that time thought the markets were efficient. They were big, efficient market hypothesis proponents. In other words, their view was everything is properly priced. You can't make any money in the market. Okay. I was not of that opinion. And I wanted to befriend myself to the finance faculty, but I was in the elevator with one of the famous professors there named Richard Roll. And I started talking to him. And he pretended I wasn't there. Like there are 2 people in the elevator, me and him. I'm talking to him, and he's like holding his head up like this is high school, like a complete snub. Like he's in the in crowd, I'm in the out crowd. He's not talking to me, right? I did not like that. So, and because you can kind of sense that I'm sort of an egomaniac, maniacal kind of person, and I actually thought I was smarter than him, and how dare he do this to Norm Zadeh? For my final course, I had the opportunity to teach a course on whatever I wanted. I was supposed to teach a course on something that I can't even understand. It was a PhD level course on a field that I have no idea. I can't even understand what the title would be, right? So I decided instead, I went to my departmental chairman and I said, can I teach a course on how to make money in the stock and commodities markets? And he said, why not? You'll probably get a pretty good crowd. So word spread that I was going to teach a course on how to make money in the stock and commodities markets. And because they knew I was applied, because I had actually used my statistics course from the fall to explain how to create the Black-Scholes model for pricing options, the kids said, Zadeh's going to teach a practical course. So Everybody came to my class. I had an auditorium, which was supposed to be allocated to Richard Roll. But I got the auditorium and he got a cubby hole staring at himself, and maybe some empty chairs. Okay. He did not like that. The finance faculty also did not like the fact that they were teaching all their kids that you can't make money in the market. And here's this guy who's claiming you can. And he's not even part of the finance faculty. He's just like a substitute teacher, a guy hired for a year. Okay. So I had these two crazy books, Harry Brown, How to Profit from a Monetary Crisis, Marty Zweig's Blue Book, very unusual textbooks, trust me. First day of class, I say, kids, we're going to do projects. You're going to study what happens once the market goes up 3 days in a row. What's the distribution of it going up the fourth day? You're going to study what happens with gold. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Somebody raises their hand and says, well, Professor Zadeh, we've been taught you can't make any money in the market. And I said, well, I don't completely agree with that. And I said, and to prove it to you, I'm going to open a real account with $10,000 and I'm going to trade it in front of the class. That was a little ballsy of me, okay? So a futures account. And we'll see if we can make money or not, right? So now I happen to have some systems that I told the class about. One system was don't fight the Fed, which is kind of a common expression, but it does work. At that time, Volcker was the Fed chairman, and interest rates were very, very high. And he recommended buying bonds, okay? And so the simple example was if the Fed chairman tells you to buy bonds, okay, he controls the price of bonds, okay? He's not going to be embarrassed. This is the best buy you're ever going to make. He's telling you interest rates are coming down. And the bond market has had a very long-term bull market since that time, okay? So that was a system that would have worked, okay? Second system, if a commodity goes up in price to several times its normal level, look for an opportunity to sell that commodity short. A good example, for example, would have been the oil market a few years back when I believe it got to somewhere around 140 and then came crashing down. And at one time was close to zero, by the way, recently. When something gets really high up there, people consume less of that commodity. They produce more. And lo and behold, the thing goes back down. So the key is the timing and to pick a good entry point. Once you establish that entry point and you start making money, you can make a lot of money making those trades. Okay. Another system was shorting the metals in perceived crises. So the system was if a war breaks out and it's not that significant, look to short gold or silver on the first day, at the close of the first day of the fighting. Lo and behold, a few days after I started this account, the Falklands War broke out, the most irrelevant war of all time. Gold shot up about $40. I shorted 2 contracts of gold. The next day or two, it was down $40. I made $8,000 on a $10,000 account in front of the class, 80%. The finance faculty went absolutely stark raving bonkers. Richard Roll, who's in China, is calling the associate dean, asking him to fire me because I had no business teaching there. I did not have a business degree, and what the hell is this guy doing? So needless to say, I was not rehired next year. I ended up making 140% when everyone's eyes on me, but then I lost all that money back later. But that's my story about UCLA. Oh, so then I started the contest after that.
And the contest, do people, is it based on the percentage gain at the end of some period of time?
Yes, the way it's very simple. The contest was I thought everybody was making money. I was watching in those days. It was Financial News Network. Now it would be CNBC. They had commentators on, and they seemed to be making money. Like they would say, I just sold my gold position that I put on the day before, blah blah blah. And you see gold's up $20. The guy looks like a genius, right? So I thought everybody's making money, and I figured, there are 100,000 brokers. No, there's 60,000 brokers. If I charge each $100, I'll make $6 million a year. I'll be rich. Okay. The problem with that analysis was people were not making money. They were losing money. Most people were losing money, particularly the traders. They were really losing money. Okay. So instead of having 60,000 people in my contest, I had 74 people who paid me $75 each. So it was a money loser. But I kept after it for a while. Again, the answer to your question is they specify a real account, real number, the number of the account. They pay me an entry fee, $75, and then I agree to publish the standings every month. Okay.
Oh, but there's no prize money?
There's no prize money because I couldn't afford prizes because I had to use the money to buy advertising. But some of my contestants have become billionaires. I mean, Paul Tudor Jones was in my contest. Louis Bacon was in my contest. Now, they didn't need my contest, but Mark Strom is probably a better example of a guy who, when he entered my $1 million plus contest, because I started a bigger contest later, he was relatively unknown, but made hundreds of millions of dollars. He was on the cover of Barron's multiple times. And, you know, that kind of coverage for a money manager is gold.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We're enjoying this, and we're really close to being out of time. At the end of our show, we have a recommended section where the host and sometimes a guest recommend something. So, Richard, do you have a recommended for us today?
Yes, of course. So my recommended this week is a book called The Master Mechanic by I.G. Broat, Broat. And I am fascinated with gambling history and also kind of crossroaders. And this particular book, now I should say I've read quite a number of these books about guys who were cheats, in the old riverboat days or whatever. And usually these books are really poorly written. But this one I was pleasantly surprised because it is really well written. And it has both this guy who was a mechanic who grew up in Steubenville, Ohio. And for people who know a little bit about Vegas history, when Vegas really started, a lot of the people running the casinos here came from Steubenville. And so this guy started out, and he was a dice mechanic, and he worked for the casinos, the underground casinos in Steubenville, and then became he was always working for the house and ended up getting connected to Meyer Lansky and other mob guys, and they sent him down to run a casino in Cuba. And when the Flamingo opened in Las Vegas, they sent him out to figure out why Bugsy Siegel was losing so much money at the Flamingo. Anyway, it's a really interesting book, and as I say, really well written. And if you're interested in it, it's based on a real guy whose name was Dino Cellini. And Dino Cellini, there's a Wikipedia page about him, so you can check that out. And one of the prominent characters in the book was a guy he worked with in the casinos in Steubenville who became Dean Martin. And Dean Martin apparently was a bust-out crap stealer back in Steubenville before he won a singing competition and became the famous singer. So anyway, that's it. The book is called The Master Mechanic by I.G. Broat.
Very good. I'm going to check that one out. My recommendation is the Risk of Ruin podcast, which we've mentioned several times before. But episode 25, which just came out in mid-June of this year, is called The Audacity of Help. And it features two guys you may have heard of, Richard Munchkin and Daryl Purpose. They share stories about, among other things, how they partnered up with each other and other people. And the episode is largely stories. Well, I've heard tons of stories from Richard over the past decade, and some from Daryl as well. About half of the stories on this podcast were either new to me or included new details of stories I knew a little bit about before. Now, I'm a big fanboy of Richard's stories, so this is heaven for me. My best guess is if these stories are new to me, they're new to you too. Check it out. Norman Zadeh, do you have a recommended for us?
Oh my God, you you tricked me because I was just going to make a general recommendation, which I'm still going to do, which has nothing to do with books of any kind. And my general recommendation, if you don't mind, is that if you want to make a lot of money, okay, the two best fields are computer science and financial management. And the reason is that if you are an expert in computer science, I mean, you know how many billionaires are made it in tech. I mean, I think most of them have made it in tech. So that's the reason. But also, if you were an expert in computer science, you can apply it to making money in the financial markets or analyzing your favorite gambling game and making money, gambling if that's what you want to do. And the reason that financial management is so good is because it's the biggest game in town and it basically is gambling. And if you're good at it, you can do really well. Uh, that's not to say you can't enjoy gambling on the side, but that's the way you make your primary income.
Amen. When my kids were growing up, that was my mantra. Math is where the money is.
All right. Thank you, Norman Zadeh. Thank you,
Thank
Richard.
you, gentlemen. I hope I didn't embarrass you too badly, but that was the real me.
Not at all.
I hope
Not
so
at all.
too.
Thanks. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard, and go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.